The first time Wren coaxed the great black wolf into the river, she held his ruined hind leg in both hands, waist deep in cold green water, and told him he was brave. The wolf trembled against her like a landslide, trying to be gentle. She thought he was some war-broken stray from the border fights, half-starved and too proud to whimper. She was wrong about almost everything. The wolf shaking in her arms was Kyle Ravencrest, Alpha King of the Blackfen territories, the man whose name made hardened warriors put down their cups and check the door. He knew exactly who he was. He simply had no intention of telling her. He meant to stay one night, get the barbed wire off his leg, and vanish before dawn like a rumor. He was wrong about that. 2. But we should start 3 weeks earlier, on the night he stepped in her eel trap. The river bend below Blackfen Keep belonged to nobody, which is why they gave it to Wren. She kept the eel weirs there, mended the fishnets for the whole pack, and smoked her catch in a leaning stone hut that smelled of alder ash and brine. Her hands were always cross-hatched with tiny cuts from the netting twine, and she rubbed lanolin into them every night, and every night the river took the softness right back out. The pack said her scent spoiled the hunt. Lavender, they said, wrinkling their noses, sweet and strange, an omega scent that made the deer bolt and the wolves lose the trail. So they had moved her downstream when she was 14, and mostly they forgot her, which is a quieter cruelty than hating someone. Her cousin Beda had promised to visit every full moon. That was 6 years and 72 moons ago. Wren had stopped counting somewhere around 40, the way you stop pressing a bruise. She was out at midnight resetting the far weir when she heard the sound. Not a howl. Something worse. A single low grunt of pain, bitten off fast. The sound a creature makes when it has decided no one is allowed to hear it suffer. She found him tangled in the old boundary wire above the third trap, a wolf the size of a plough horse, black as the inside of a chimney, with one gold eye catching her lantern light. His left hind leg was fouled in rusted barbs, and beneath the fresh blood she could see the older ruin. The leg itself, scarred and thin and wrong, muscle wasted along the thigh, the whole limb held at a careful, practiced angle. A lame leg. A war leg. Any sensible person would have run. Wren set down her lantern in the mud and said, "Well, you've made a proper mess of my fence, haven't you?" Inside the wolf, the Alpha King held very still and thought, "She smells like lavender." Then he thought, "I should leave. The moment this wire is off, I am leaving. I am the Alpha King of Blackfen. I do not get rescued by omegas in patched wool skirts who talk to wolves like disappointing house guests." She knelt in the freezing mud beside 200 pounds of apex predator and began working the barbs free with her netting pliers, one by one, narrating the whole time. "This one's deep, so you'll want to bite me now if you're going to. No? Good lad. This one's just caught in the fur. There. You know, you're lucky it's me. Anyone else from the pack would have taken your pelt for a rug." She paused at the old scars, her thumb moving over the wasted muscle so lightly he barely felt it, and her voice changed, went softer. "Oh," she said. "Oh, someone hurt you a long time ago, didn't they?" He had been asked about the leg exactly 4 times in 3 years. 2 healers, 1 council elder, and Lady Solveig, who had asked in the tone of a woman inspecting a crack in a load-bearing wall. He had answered none of them. Now a stranger with brine under her fingernails had said, "Someone hurt you." And something behind his ribs came loose, like a shelf giving way. "Leave," he told himself. "The wire is off. Leave." She fed him half her winter store of smoked eel. He ate it. She spread willow bark salve on the wire cuts with her bare hands, humming something tuneless, and he let her. She said, "You can sleep by the smoker, it's warm, but if you eat my cat, I'll drown you myself." And the Alpha King of Blackfen, terror of the northern marches, limped into her hut and lay down next to a smug orange cat named Pilchard, and slept better than he had slept in 3 years. In the morning, she was gone to the weirs, and he stood at the door of the hut with the whole grey river before him, and every instinct he owned said go home. His beta would be tearing the keep apart. The council met at noon. Lady Solveig's father was arriving with a marriage contract, the length of a hunting treaty. He looked at the water. The river moved past, deep and patient, and his heart began to slam. Because Cale Ravencrest had not entered water since the night the burning bridge came down under him, since the timbers and the smoke and the black cold closing over his head with a crushed leg that would not kick. The healers had saved the leg and lost the nerve. The king had learned to hide the limp under long strides and longer coats. The wolf could not hide it at all. In wolf form, he lurched. So the wolf form, the true form, the honest form, had become a private shame he only wore at night alone, when no one could see the Alpha King drag his own leg like a sack. She had seen. She had held the ruined leg in her scarred little hands and called him good lad. He went home. He absolutely went home, that morning, exactly as planned. I was back by sunset. His beta, a dry, long-suffering man named Osric, noticed the mud first. "My king, there is river mud on your boots." I inspected the southern fords. "The southern fords are limestone." "Then I inspected them thoroughly," said the king, and swept past him, and Osric looked at the ceiling of the great hall and asked it for patience, and the ceiling, which had watched Ravencrest kings do foolish things for 9 generations, offered none. So began the strangest double life in the history of the Blackfen pack. By day, Kyle was the king. He sat through council sessions where Elder Morholt droned about tithes and bloodlines. He endured the visits of Lady Solveig, who was beautiful the way a sword is beautiful, and who spoke to him of alliance and heirs with the brisk efficiency of a woman ordering winter grain. By night, the Black Wolf went down to the river bend, and the Black Wolf was, there is no kind way to say this, an absolute disgrace. The first week, he told himself it was the eel. She smoked it with alder and something sweet, and a king could not be blamed for appreciating quality provisions. The second week, she started the swimming. It began because of the hound. She told him about it while untangling a net, the wolf lying across both her feet like a rug that had opinions. "I had a lame hound once, when I still lived up at the village. Old Marsh. Cartwheel went over his hip. Everyone said put him down, but a leg that can't run can still swim, you know. Water carries the weight. So I taught him. Took all summer. He lived 4 more years and died fat." She looked down at the wolf, at the withered hind leg he always tucked beneath himself, out of sight, and she said, "I see you hiding it. You don't have to hide it from me." The wolf looked away. Wren, who had been not looked at by an Enter pack for 6 years, recognized the gesture like her own reflection. The next evening she walked into the shallows in her shift, up to her knees, and held out a piece of smoked eel and said, Come on then, duck. I did not move, partly because of the water, mostly because she had, at some point in the past week, named the Alpha King of Blackfen duck. She'd explained it cheerfully. Because you hate water, it's called irony. Pilchard doesn't catch pilchards either. Somewhere in the keep, thought the king, there is a chandler who was flogged for calling me Cael the Cold within my hearing, and this woman has named me after waterfowl. Duck, come here. He came. That was the humiliating part. He always came. He put one paw in the river, and his whole body locked, and the night under the bridge rose up his throat, timber and smoke and the black cold, and he made a sound he had never made in front of another living soul, a thin, high, broken sound. Wren didn't drag him. She didn't coo. She sat down in the freezing shallows in her shift, soaked to the waist, and waited, holding the eel, shivering and patient, until the wolf, who could not stand to see her cold, waded in to stand over her. And then she laughed, water running off her elbows, and said, "There, that wasn't so terrible." And the king realized he was standing in a river and had not died. And the wolf inside him realized that her wet hair smelled even more of lavender, and both of them were lost. Every night after, a little deeper. She held him. That must be said plainly, because it was the whole engine of the thing. She wrapped her arms around a wolf the size of a pony and floated him like a lamed hound, one hand under his chest, one hand cradling the ruined leg, walking backward into the deep green water while he paddled with 3 good legs and panicked, and she talked the entire time. Water carries the weight. Feel that? That's the river holding you. It doesn't care if the leg's lame. Nothing weighs anything in here. You're just as fast as anyone. His claws raked her forearms once, in a bad moment. 4 red lines from wrist to elbow, and he froze in horror, and she just pressed her forehead down between his ears and said, "It's all right." Marsh did the same. Fear's got claws, that's all. We go again tomorrow. They went again tomorrow. Meanwhile, the thefts began, because the wolf, freed nightly from the king's discipline, turned out to have the moral character of a large, sentimental raccoon. First, it was her red mending thread. She turned her hut upside down looking for it. It was, at that moment, wound carefully around the 4th bedpost of the royal bed in Blackfen Keep, where the king could smell it while pretending to review border reports. When Osric raised an eyebrow at it, the king said, "It marks the post for repairs." Osric looked at the ancient ironwood bedpost, which would outlast the mountains, and said nothing, which was worse. Then it was one wool sock off her drying line. Then her carved comb, the one with the missing tooth. Then the wolf began paying, because even a raccoon has honor. She woke to find a whole goose on her doorstep, a fat one, freshly killed and suspiciously well fed for a wild bird. 2 days later, the keep's poultry keeper filed a complaint about a missing goose, and Osric read the complaint and looked at his king, and the king said, without glancing up from his papers, "Foxes." And Osric wrote foxes on the complaint in the beautiful looping script of a man building a case for a later argument. The escalation reached its natural conclusion on a night of hard rain in the 3rd week, when Wren woke at some black hour to a hut gone strangely warm, and found 200 pounds of wet wolf in her bed. Not beside her bed. In it, under the blanket somehow, with his great black head on her spare pillow, and an expression of profound innocence, while Pilchard sat on the table, radiating betrayal. "Duck," she said. "No." The wolf did not move. The wolf had heard no in the voices of generals, elders, and kings, and had never once encountered a no that survived contact with patience. "You're soaked. You smell like the bottom of a boat." I put one enormous paw very gently over her hand. She should have pushed him out. Instead, she lay back down in the warm animal dark, rain hammering the roof. This ridiculous, broken war-wolf curled around her like a wall with a heartbeat, and she felt, for the first time in 6 years of counted and uncounted moons, completely safe. "One night," she told him sternly, already falling asleep in the crook of his shoulder. Inside the wolf, the king lay rigid with the enormity of what he had done. "This is a diplomatic incident," he thought. "She is a subject of my crown, asleep on my shoulder, and she calls me Duck, and I have stolen her comb, and I cannot stop coming back, and Osric knows, and I am going to have the poultry keeper reassigned." Then she sighed in her sleep, lavender and wood smoke, and burrowed closer, and the king's every thought went out like a candle in the rain, and the wolf, honest creature, simply curled tighter and thought, "Mine, mine, mine. This one is mine," and neither half of him left before dawn ever again. I nearly ruined it all himself on Tithe Day. Once a season, the river keepers brought their smoked catch to the keep. Wren came up the hill with her baskets, small and wind-burned among the crowd, and Kael in the great hall in his black coat and his crown of iron, saw her from the dais and forgot the treaty in front of him mid-sentence. She bowed with the others. She did not look at him twice. Why would she? He was the cold, distant king, and her whole heart was down at the river with a lame black stray. But as she set her baskets down, Elder Moreholt sniffed and said, loudly enough to carry, "Keep the lavender one downwind of the hall, someone. That scent has spoiled better rooms than this." A sound came off the dais. Low, rolling, subterranean, the soundstone makes before it slides. Every wolf in the hall went still, because it was the king, growling, and no one could work out why. Kael strangled it into a cough. Wren, gathering her empty baskets, glanced up at him for one heartbeat with a small, puzzled frown, and her eyes went, briefly, to the way he stood, weight canted, left leg held at a careful, practiced angle, and something flickered in her face like a fish under water, there and gone. Then Osric announced the next tithe, and the moment drowned. That night the wolf brought her a wheel of the keep's best cheese, and Wren said, "Duck, you have got to stop robbing whoever it is you're robbing. They're going to hang you," and fed him a third of it anyway. It was over the cheese that night that she told him. This is the part she would never have told a person. "I'm to have a suitor," she said, "to the wolf, to the fire, to nobody. Dain. He runs salt up the river. He's stopped here 3 seasons now. He's kind. He doesn't mind the scent, or says he doesn't." She worked lanolin into her cut hands, slow. The wolf had gone very still against her legs. "He's asked me to come north with him when the ice breaks, and I keep thinking, that's it. That's the whole dream, isn't it? Someone kind who doesn't mind you. That's more than most Omegas like me get." Her hands stopped. The fire ticked. "But I don't want someone who doesn't mind me, Duck. I want just once, somebody who couldn't breathe without me. Isn't that stupid? A weir keeper with spoiled scent, holding out for, she laughed at herself, small and cracked. For a mate bond, like in the old songs. I'd rather grow old alone with you and pilchard than settle for kind. She scratched the wolf's ears. Don't tell anyone. The wolf pressed his head into her stomach, hard enough to fold her over him, and did not sleep at all that night. And the king inside him lay in the dark, composing and discarding 100 sentences that all began with the same 3 impossible words, "It is me." Then Dane came back with the thaw, and everything caught fire. How was, this must be admitted, genuinely kind, which made it worse. A broad, sandy man who fixed her smoker flew without being asked, and brought salt and a bolt of blue cloth, and laughed easily. The wolf watched from the tree line for the whole of one endless afternoon, while Dain mended her roof, and Wren handed him nails, and the 2 of them laughed about something the wolf could not hear, and the wolf systematically shredded a fallen log into toothpicks. The next day it got worse, because the king did it in person. He told Osric he was inspecting the fisheries. Osric said, "Of course, my king. Shall I have the goose sent ahead, or will you be robbing the smokehouse today?" And Kael pretended not to hear him. He rode down to the river bend as himself, black coat, iron crown, 6 guards. He could not shake an official royal inspection of 1 eel weir, and arrived to find Dain the salt trader helping Wren stretch new netting, their hands overlapping on the frame. The Alpha King of Blackfen, who had negotiated the winter truce without raising his voice, who had once ended a border war with a single letter, stood in the mud of her yard and lost his mind with total quietness. He inspected the weir for 1 hour and 11 minutes. He asked Dain about salt licenses. He asked about North River trade permits, which he then remembered aloud were under review. He asked Dain in the flat, pleasant voice that senior members of the court had learned to flee from, how long he intended to remain in Blackfen waters. Wren stood by her smoker, with her hands twisted in her apron, terrified, because the cold king was in her yard, and she couldn't understand what she'd done wrong. And every time his eyes landed on her, they didn't look cold at all. They looked like the wolf's did, one gold-flecked stare, and that flicker went through her again, fish under water. Faster now. Dane, no fool, left the next morning with his salt and a courteous goodbye. What he said to Wren at parting was gentle and a little sad. "Whoever it is, girl, I hope he deserves you." She said there wasn't anyone. He looked at the wolf-sized bed of pressed grass beside her door, and the claw-marked doorpost, and smiled and poled off north. And Solveig came down to the river, because Solveig missed nothing. She came alone, unarmored, in riding leather, and stood on the bank while Wren gutted eels and refused to be intimidated with any success whatsoever. "You should know what you're playing with," Solveig said. "The king is to announce a Luna at the moon feast. It has taken 3 years to make him agree to that much. Blackfen needs it settled." "I don't know what that has to do with me, my lady." "Then you're stupider than your scent suggests." But Solveig kept standing there, and something in her went sideways, some rigging shifting in a wind. She looked at the river a long time. "I pulled him out of this river once," she said, in a different voice altogether. "At the burning bridge. He doesn't know it was me. He was mostly drowned, and I never told him, because you don't hand a king a debt like that. I carried him up the bank with his leg crushed flat, and I swore he'd never be in that kind of water again while I lived." Her jaw worked once. "I don't love him. I don't think I know how. They trained it out of me young. But I have spent 3 years standing between that man and every current that could take him, and you should understand that I was not doing it for a crown." Then, as if the words had cost her exact change, she resented spending. She straightened, and the sword came back into her face, and she said, "Stay away from the moon feast, weir girl," and rode off. Wren stood with eel blood on her hands and a roaring in her ears, because Solveig had said this river, and his leg crushed flat, and Wren's mind was suddenly, treacherously, laying 2 images over one another. A king who stood at a careful angle. A wolf with a wasted thigh. She said, out loud, alone, "No. Don't be daft." But that night, when Duck came, she held his ruined leg in the firelight longer than usual, tracing the scar lines, and the wolf watched her face with something close to human dread. And she said quietly, "Duck, is there something you'd tell me, if you could?" The wolf looked at her with the whole confession in his eyes, and could not make his throat do it. 3 nights later the flood came, and the river told the truth for him. Spring melt off the high fells, a wall of brown water in the dark, and the great weir groaned, and Wren, fool that she was, went out into the raw with a lantern, because 2 seasons of eel traps and half her livelihood were lashed to that frame. She was on the 3rd pile, cutting nets loose, when the frame let go. The timber took her across the shoulder, and the river took the rest of her. Cold black water, closing overhead. No up, no down. Her lantern gone, her lungs a shrinking fist. On the bank, the wolf hit the flood at a dead run. Understand what that was. 3 years since the bridge. 3 weeks of a lame animal being floated in gentle shallows by a woman who told him the river would carry his weight. He went into the black roaring water that lived at the bottom of his every nightmare without one full stride of hesitation, and the current slammed him, and the lame leg gave nothing, and he swam anyway, because she had taught him, because nothing weighs anything in here, because lavender, because mine. He reached her. He got her collar in his teeth and hauled, and the flood spun them both, and he could not, with 3 legs and a mouthful of wool, hold her head above the chop. She was slack, she was heavy, she was drowning in his grip, and so the wolf did the only thing left, the thing with hands. Wren came back to herself in the shallows of the far gravel bar, coughing river water out on her hands and knees, and when her eyes cleared, she saw, kneeling in the moonlit water beside her, a man. Black-haired, scarred at the left thigh, a man she had bowed to across a great hall, wearing nothing but river water and terror, his hands hovering an inch off her shoulders as if he'd lost the right to touch her, and around his neck, on a leather cord, soaked and sodden, was wound a length of red mending thread. "Duck," she said. It came out cracked and disbelieving. The Alpha King of Blackfen knelt in the river, and his face broke open like ice going off a lake, and he wept. Not nobly. Not one gleaming tear. He wept the way the wolf had made that first thin, broken sound at the water's edge, ugly and helpless, kneeling in the current with his ruined leg folded under him, saying her name. And I couldn't, and forgive me. In no order that made sense. This man who had not been touched kindly in 3 years, weeping into the river she had taught him to swim in. And Wren, dripping, half-drowned, looked at him and felt the whole month land on her at once. The bed, the bath, the floating, the secrets, everything she had told the fire and the wolf and nobody. She had held out her heart to a stray, and a king had been standing inside the pelt, taking notes. "Get up," she said. He got up. Water streamed off him. He was a head and a half taller than her, and he stood like a condemned man. "The thread," she said. "My comb, the sock, the goose." Her voice climbed with each item. "The cheese. The cheese that was the keep's cheese. You fed me stolen royal cheese. I threatened to hang you to your own face. Yes, you slept in my... Yes, I bathed you. I held you in the river like a lamed hound, and told you my whole. I told you about Diane. I told you about the mate bond. I told you things I've never..." She stopped, because her voice had gone to pieces, and she stood in the shallows with her fists shaking. "I wasn't lonely when you were there. Do you understand what you stole? It wasn't the cheese. You let me not be lonely on false pretenses. Ren, no. You don't get the wolf's privileges in the man's skin. Go home, my king." And she turned her back on the Alpha of Blackfen, walked out of the river, and shut her door, and Kael Ravencrest stood alone in the flood shallows all the same, until Osric, who had followed with dry clothes because Osric always knew, draped a cloak over him and said nothing at all, which for once was kindness. He did not send guards, or gifts, or summons. He did the only honest thing left. He came back the next evening as the man, in plain clothes, limping openly up her path, no coat cut to hide it, and sat down on the wolf's pressed grass bed beside her door like a petitioner, and confessed through the shut door. All of it. The wire, the first night, the eel. The thread was because it smelled of you, and I could not sleep in that keep without it. The comb I have no defense for. The goose I paid the poultry keeper for, eventually, at 4 times its worth, and told him it was foxes, and he knows it was not foxes, and now there is a man in my keep who holds that over his king, and I do not care. The door stayed shut, but he heard her sit down against the other side of it. I came the first night because of the wire. I came the second night because no one had touched that leg in 3 years without flinching, and you held it in your hands and called me brave. I am the Alpha King of Blackfen, Ren. 400 wolves would die for me. Not one of them would sit in a cold river holding me while I learned not to be afraid. A long silence. The river ran. You said you wanted someone who couldn't breathe without you. You said don't tell anyone. His forehead came to rest against the wood. I'm telling everyone. The door did not open that night, but when he rose to leave, near dawn, the latch clicked, and one one-wool sock, the mate of the stolen one, dropped out onto the step. He carried it home like a treaty. The moon feast came at the full moon, as it had to. The great hall packed, the council seated. Morholt sleek with satisfaction, Lady Solveig in silver at the foot of the dais, the marriage contract laid out on the king's table, with the ink waiting. Morholt had built it all beautifully, the announcement drafted, the alliance sealed, and as a quiet cruelty of housekeeping, an order among the feast papers reassigning the downstream weirs and their keeper to a work crew in the far fens. Spoiled scent, resolved at last. Kael stood before his pack, took the contract, and read it in silence. Then he set it down, stepped to the edge of the dais, and did the one thing no Ravencrest king had done in living memory. In front of all of them, he shifted, slowly, deliberately, and the great black wolf stood before the pack of Blackfen, with his wasted hind leg in full torchlight, hiding nothing, and lurched, limping, dot and carry, down the length of the great hall, while 400 wolves watched their king show them the wound 3 years of coats had covered, and out the open doors, and the whole feast poured after him into the night, because no power on earth was going to stop them. He limped the full mile down to the river bend. She was at the water, because she was always at the water, netting needle in her hand, and she turned to find the black wolf at the edge of her yard, with an entire kingdom standing in the dark behind him, torches down the hillside like a fallen constellation. Duck crossed the yard and lay down and put his great head on her feet. Then the man stood up in the pelt's place, kneeling still, at her feet in front of everyone, iron crown and all, and said, in the voice that carried to the last torch on the hill, "This is Wren of the river bend. Her scent has never spoiled a hunt. It brought your king home. She pulled me from wire and taught a lame wolf to swim, and I could not breathe without her before I even knew her name. She is mine if she will have me, and I am hers, as whether she will or not. Anyone who objects may say so now to me, in whichever shape they prefer." Nobody preferred either shape. Wren stood with her needle in her hand, and her heart going like a weir in flood. And she looked down at him, and what she said was not yes. What she said in the ringing silence was, "You still owe me a goose, my king." And the laugh that went through the pack broke something old and frozen in Blackfen, and under the cover of it, she took his face in her scarred, brine-cracked hands and kissed him, and 400 wolves howled the mating song at the full moon, and the bond came down over the two of them, like the river closing overhead. Except this time, neither of them was drowning. Elder Morholt's reassignment order was found among the feast papers, along with, once Osric began pulling threads, 6 years of skimmed tithes off the river keeper's catch. The king's justice was exact and widely enjoyed. Morholt kept his life and lost his seat, and served out his years as a weir keeper's labourer in the downstream cold, learning precisely how much work smoked eel is, downwind of everything. Solveig came to Wren once, before riding home to her father's territory, and stood at the river a while, and said only, "I carried him out of this river once. I could never make him go back in." She looked at the rebuilt weir, at the wolf-shaped flat spot in the grass, and something almost like peace crossed the sword of her face. "You did!" She left a wedding gift with no name on it. It was a coil of red thread, and this is where we leave them, because this is where they can always be found. A summer evening, a year on. The river bend, gold and slow. The Luna of Blackfen sits on the bank with her skirt full of netting, and pilchard asleep in the willow shade and in the deep green pool below the weir. A great black wolf is swimming, strong, easy, 3 legs and a rudder, cutting the water like he was born in it, showing off, frankly, for an audience of one. He hauls out streaming, shakes river all over her nets, ignores her shriek, and collapses with his huge head in her lap, the ruined leg stretched out in the sun, hiding nothing. Her fingers find the wet fur behind his ears. His gold eye drifts shut, and in his sleep, dreaming, his paws begin to twitch and paddle, swimming through some easy current where nothing weighs anything at all. And Wren, Luna of Blackfen, keeper of 1 weir, 1 cat, and 1 king, bends down and murmurs against his ear the first thing she ever taught him, and the last sound over the water that evening is her voice, saying, "Good lad, duck. The river holds you."